I went to go under my sink the other day to grab a sponge or something, and when I opened it up, I could see that it was wet in here, and that can only mean one thing. Womp womp, we have a leak. So the first thing I did was check the drain pipes. That tends to be, in my experience, where most leaks are happening under sinks. Sometimes the trap here can clog and it backs up and can leak out of these joints right here. But I quickly figured out that despite all the joints here and everything, there were no leaks in the drain. So that left, through the powers of deduction, the supply lines back here. So this is my cold water supply line coming up from the basement, and this is my hot. So I looked around, these guys tend to leak around the valve sometimes, no leak happening. So follow it up. Sometimes it leaks along the connections where the solders are. That tends to be a leak. But if I follow the dishwasher line out, sure enough, boop, right there, you could see that water droplet forming. So I found my leak, but it was curious because it wasn't leaking from where the solder is. It was just right in the middle of the pipe here. So if I dry this off, hopefully you can get a view of what's going on. Now, I don't know if this is what's happening with your pipe, but you can see right there, it looks like something reacted with the copper. It might have been some kind of chemical that was underneath the sink here. But you can see a little water droplet forming, so there's a tiny little pinhole in the supply line right here that goes out to the dishwasher. So I don't know how that happened, but what I do know is that we have to fix it. So there are basically 3 ways of repairing a leak like this in a copper line. Number 1 is soldering with a blowtorch and all these tools right here. Number 2 is the Sharkbite, and then number 3 is a compression union. I'm gonna explain the pros and cons of each here. Now, soldering is what the pros tend to do. It tends to be how they would fix it. For the homeowner, though, it's probably unlikely that you have a blowtorch kicking around and flux and all these materials you need to install this coupling. So what you would do is use this pipe cutter, cut the copper pipe right where the leak is, put this on either end, so put either end where the cuts were made into either side, and then you have to solder. You melt this lead right here, and it seals up around either side. Now, the good part about this is that it's very stable. I mean, there's a reason this is what the pros do. It'll last a long time. The cons are that for you guys watching this video, you're probably a homeowner trying to fix your leak. You probably don't have a blowtorch and these tools. And while this is the cheapest when it comes to getting what you need, you only have to buy this, and this is probably less than $1. You probably don't have all these tools kicking around. And the last con going on for this guy is that it's dangerous. I mean, you're using a freaking blowtorch underneath your sink. Not the best thing to do if you're not a trained professional. So, moving on to the Sharkbite. Now this thing is, I gotta admit, it's an amazing invention. I've used it many times. You would do the same thing. You would use a pipe cutter and you'd cut right where the leak is on the copper pipe. And I'm gonna show you how to use this in a minute here, by the way. And then, just like that copper coupling with the other one, you insert one end of the pipe here and one end on the other side, and then that's it. This thing has teeth on the inside that grab onto the pipe, and it just grabs and holds on, and that's it. It's pretty awesome. So the pros are how easy it is. That's the biggest pro to using this. The con is that it's expensive. This part alone was probably $13 or $14. And you do need some other tools. This is a tool that you use around the copper after you cut it to smooth it out. This is a little release tool that you would use if you mess up. And the biggest con with this is that it's a relatively new product, and the jury's still out on how long it lasts. And most pros agree that this really is a temporary solution and shouldn't be used as a permanent fixture. There's just not enough time that these have been on the market to determine if they last, 10, 20, 30 years. So that leaves us with the last and what I think is the best option right now, this compression union. So this is it right here, and I'm going to show you how this is installed in a minute. But basically, this guy right here, this little brass sleeve, is where all the magic happens. You slide this over. Well, I'll show you guys in a minute here. What I love about this one is that it's, for the homeowner, it's the easiest and probably your cheapest option, assuming you don't have all those tools to do soldering. This guy is between $4 and $5. You can get it at your local hardware store. And then the only tools you need are a wrench. You can use an adjustable wrench. You might need 2 wrenches, and I'll show you why in a minute here. But most homeowners have an adjustable wrench kicking around. And then if you don't have one of these pipe cutters, you know, they're about $10. So really you're only $15 in. And this is definitely a more permanent solution. It doesn't make me nervous like this Sharkbite does, which has like plastic pieces in it. It's just very simple, and I'm going to show you why it's so simple in a minute. So let's use this compression union and repair this pipe. Here we are in everybody's favorite place in the house, underneath the kitchen sink. So the first thing we got to do is shut off the water. So I am lucky enough in this instance that the leak is after the main shut off. So I'm just going to shut off the water here. Turn that clockwise. If you are not so lucky to have your leak after the shutoff, you can always find the main water shutoff in your house. Let me do a cutaway to the main shutoff, see what that looks like. All right, next we need to cut away this bad piece of pipe. So that's where this guy comes into play. This is a mini pipe cutter. The other one I showed you before is a standard pipe cutter. So this is a mini. It's designed to get into tight spaces like we have here. Because this wall is right behind the pipe, we can't use that regular pipe cutter. So this is a mini. You'll see it's got 2 little rollers on the top, right there, there, and there. So those kind of sit on the pipe. And then there's a cutting wheel, if you can see. It's hard to see here, but there's a cutting wheel on the bottom down here. And that actually cuts into the pipe. And so it sits right on here. Sits on the pipe. I'm going to go just to the left, about a 1/4 inch to the left of my leak, because I want to cut away about a 1/2 inch of the pipe. So I sit it on here, and I tighten the wheel on top, and as soon as you start to feel a little resistance, you can go about another 1/2 turn, and then you start circling around, and you just tighten it down a little more each time, and that slowly gets a deeper and deeper cut into the pipe. So on each revolution, I'm just turning it about a 1/4 turn to a 1/2 turn to tighten it down a little right here, up on the dial. Tighten, keep going. Now you are gonna have some water leak out, so you should have a bucket or a cup or something to catch the water. I should take my own advice here. I'm gonna put a towel underneath. All right, I'm gonna speed this up because this is kind of boring. Okay, we have liftoff. All right, so now we have our break in the pipe here. All right, so I'm gonna cut away, like I said, about a 1/2 inch of this pipe, because even though the union, the coupling, is gonna cover where the leak was, I don't quite trust that piece of pipe. So I'm gonna actually cut away a little bit of it, about a 1/2 inch. So I'll speed this up too. You don't need to see this. All right, we've cut out where the leak was. Now this next step, I'm gonna argue is not 100% necessary, but I'm going to do it, and it's not difficult. You do need a piece of sandpaper. This is special plumber's sandpaper, although I'd argue the only thing that's special about it is that it's overpriced. It's just 120 grit sandpaper. And what you're gonna do is clean up the copper with this. So it's just like any sanding you would do. I'm just gonna wrap it around and just kind of sand some copper here. This is just to clean up any gunk that might be on there that might interfere with a good solid connection for your compression fitting. So I'm gonna speed this up. All right, it's go time for compression fitting. So here it is. When you get this at the hardware store, these nuts will come off on either side. Be careful, because inside is a little copper sleeve. This guy right here. Can you see that? So this is where the compression term comes from. So when you tighten down this nut, and I'll show you that in a minute, this thing actually is soft enough metal that it makes a nice tight seal. So we're going to put one on one side. This is going to go on this side over here. Oh, sorry. Make sure you do this part first. The nut needs to go on first. So nut over. Then you'll put your little brass sleeve over that. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So this nut will come off the other side. Same thing. You're going to have a little brass sleeve in there. And that goes on the other side. Nut goes first. And then your little brass sleeve. See that? That goes over. Okay, so now these are going to line up, and then this guy does all the work. So this goes on here. You're going to feel it stop. It'll only go up to a certain point. Then you're going to push that sleeve right up against it, and then the nut goes onto the thread. Now this is important. You only want to hand tighten this. So like I said, that little sleeve, that little brass sleeve is very soft. So you only want to hand tighten it to that point, and then you don't have to go much further. So I said you might need 2 wrenches, and that's because if you have a wrench to do this nut, if you can see, the whole thing is turning. So they give you another nut built right into the coupling here so that you can use, and luckily they make it 2 different size wrench, 2 different size nuts, so that you only need 1 set of wrenches, so they're not the same exact size, because you might not have both 2 of the same wrenches hanging around. So here's the crucial part. You only want to turn this about a 1/2 to 3/4 full turn, and that'll be enough to make that nice seal. So if I can just quit being a, here we go. All right, so that right there is about a 1/2 turn. That's all I'm going to do for now. You can always go in and tighten up later if it's not a perfect seal. So I'm just going to do a 1/2 turn on each of these. So again, you'll feel that stop when you push it in. Bring the nut up, hand tighten. Feel it get to that point. Use my wrench and go about oh, come on, Luke. Go about a 1/2 turn. That's a 1/2 turn right there. So that's it. So I'm going to turn, I'm going to put my cup under here just in case it leaks. I'm going to turn the water back on. Water's going on. And looks like we're good. No leaks. All right, so recap. You can pick this up at your local hardware store, and I do want to recommend that you pick it up at your, please support your local hardware store. If you don't live near one, or it's going to be tough for you to get one, I will put a link to one of these things in the video description here, and I'll put a link to the mini pipe cutter and stuff too. But you can pick this up for $4 to $5 at the hardware store. You need a pipe cutting tool, maybe some sandpaper, some fine grit 120 sandpaper, and you'll be back in business. If this does leak a little bit, just take your wrench and turn it just a little bit. Just keep experimenting with it. Just turn it a tiny bit until you get to the point where there's no leaks.